Wait, ow, my ankle. Okay, listen, there are so many different types of wheel fitment out there, but most importantly, always when you're doing it for the first time, you get the whole wheel fitment like wrong. You aim for tucked and you get flush. You aim for flush and you get poke. It's like some other random trendy term. So in this episode of Don't Mess Up Your Car Build, we're talking about different types of wheel fitment and what you're probably not thinking about when you're trying to mod your car. So I'm Alex Martini, and let's just jump right into it. By the way, we've done this a long time, and the only reason we get to make videos like this is because people mod their car over on MartiniWorks. We may not have the most crazy site that's super fancy, but we're getting there. We're adding new parts every single day. So if you're looking for something and you don't see it out there, click the little chatbot thing. You're talking to one of us, and we would love to help you mod your car. Number one is ride height. As the car goes down in terms of ride height, you gain something called camber. Usually it's about -0.5 to 1 degrees per 1 inch of that car being lowered. So here, let me give you an example. Right now, I'm in front of the 430. This is the rear wheel, and if you look at it from the side, you're gonna see that the wheel and the tire are extending outside of the wheel well. That would be technically a poke fitment. But here's the thing, this is on air suspension. And as I just told you, as the suspension ride height goes down, you're gonna see that this wheel starts to camber in. So you can actually see the little tire knobs start to hit this here. But now we're starting to get into a tucked setup where a lot of times people wouldn't even tell you that this is flush by any means, but it's actually tucked. Go all the way down, and you have now a tuck setup. Sometimes when you mess with your aftermarket suspension or you just have an old car, your wheels are sometimes no longer center. I'm not kidding. So like, let's say you buy coilovers from MartiniWorks because we want to help you get the right parts. You'll notice that some cars will experience this thing where your wheel is literally no longer in the center of the wheel well. Let me show you. If you look at this wheel right here, you are gonna notice that there is more space behind the wheel than there is in front of the wheel. Before you jump into deciding what wheel fitment you want, or maybe going and finding the most aggressive wheel size you can possibly run, actually just look at your wheels, make sure they're in the center, and if they're not, a lot of times if you type it in on Google, you're gonna find whatever appropriate aftermarket mod you need to straighten this up. And it's also just important to know that your suspension bits are good to go, and when you're about to put it in an extreme situation like fender to lip situation, because we're talking about wheel fitment, the suspension geometry and all that stuff also has to be dang near perfect. So let's talk about the first and most common type of suspension is tucked. Tucked is usually where the wheel and tire are within the wheel arches of the car. And a lot of times the reason that people would run a tucked fitment is just because of fitment restraints. I'll give you an example. This is a tucked fitment. You have the wheel and the tire both inside the wheel well here. And so the reason that we're running a tucked fitment on this is because we wanted the work emotion ZR10s more than pretty much anything. We really wanted to run something that was Japanese. We wanted something to run that was a one piece that was available and that was actually the same quality, if not better, than what the Volk forged wheels that come on this car stock. So you're gonna be playing with that too. Don't feel bad sometimes if you don't see an option for your car. You can still run a nice tuck setup, and if you wanna get that flush fitment, just go with like a 5mm spacer. Usually if you're playing within that 5 to 7 game, you're gonna be absolutely fine. Now, the only big con that I'd probably give you on this one is that honestly, a tucked fitment, it gives the car a little bit of like a weenie look at full setup. It just sometimes when it gets a little bit too aggressive, it kind of looks like your car is on stilts. So you do have to be very, very careful. Number two is flush, and this is where most people aim for. Flush fitment is where we all want to be. It's a great combination of what I would call just looks and function. Why do people run flush? It looks the best. It gives you the best performance out of the suspension and the tires. It looks fantastic. It doesn't look like your wheels and your tires are separate from your car. It just looks like one gorgeous fucking ham sandwich. And I will say, doing it right is a lot harder than you think. The best platforms for this sort of setup is literally everything, but the cons is that it's hard to hit and it's easy to mess up. This one, we're running a multi-piece Volk GTC, and we're running a flush fitment for kind of the show setup, we'll call it, for this car. So we're not drifting on this, we're actually just driving around town on this. And you're gonna see that it's almost perfectly flush with the wheel well that we've got going on here, or the fender arch, whatever you want to call it. This is probably my favorite fitment. It's actually one of my favorite fitments on the car. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to get dope ass fitment, because over here we have a Koenig. It's a one piece, it's a rotary forged wheel, very basic wheel setup, very basic tire setup. You can get this at MartiniWorks and it'd be at your door in like 2 goddamn days. It's not a super complicated thing. It doesn't have to be a super expensive thing. Getting flush fitment is absolutely badass. The third one here would be poke. You've probably heard this term before, and it's a little bit of a weird one, I would say. That's the third type of fitment. This is where the wheel and tire protrude outside of the wheel well. So why do people run poke? As somebody who has way back in the day, okay, let me tell you, on muscle car platforms, I don't actually think it always looks that bad. I've seen some pretty cool setups that look killer, but it's still a very mild thing. It's a very, very mild thing. It's like sriracha, you just don't want to put too much on it. Again, I will say with this, if you do run up going with a poke setup and you make a mistake, you're usually super dickered. This is not a place you want to be, because you can't move the wheel inward anymore. You've already bought a wheel that's supposed to stick out, and if you're like, wow, it sticks out a little bit too much, you can't shave the back of the wheel off. Now, number 4 is the Flavor Town, aka Stance, or Hella Flush, but really we'll call it Stance Fitment, okay? It's gonna be this thing where all the annoying ass people on the internet, they just hate it for no reason, or just people who want to drive their car normally just hate people that have any sort of stance fitment to their car, okay? These are typically wide wheels, aggressive negative camber, non-existent tire sidewall, and usually Suicide Boys on repeat. But why are people running stance setups? I mean, a lot of times it's a look thing, it's a style thing, it's a community thing. There's 10,000 reasons as to why somebody would run a stance fitment setup. Not everybody has to like it, but at the end of the day, it's a car, man. You do what you want to it. You want to have fun with it. If you want it to be a show car, you can have fun with it. This is one of those things where as long as you do it right and you really try not to take any shortcuts, a stance fitment for like a car show setup, whether you're going to like Gatlinburg or Chattanooga or something like that, it's actually pretty cool. The only thing I will say here is kind of just like the poke fitment, is that when you mess it up, you really end up messing it up bad. I've seen a lot of people that will go with a static setup, they throw it on negative 10 degrees of camber, they put it fender to lip, and they absolutely thrash their fenders. And to be honest, I think when you get into that point, I don't think it actually looks good, nor does it do what it's intended to do anymore, because you've lost the style of it because it just looks like shit. So with that being said, if you are trying to run stance setups, know that it's gonna take a lot more. You're kind of adding more layers to this whole thing, right? Like if you're running something that's tucked, it's actually a pretty easy thing to do. If you're running something flush, it's a little bit harder because you're playing with wheel width and offset and tire size and tire sidewall size, your aspect ratio and things. When you start getting into poke, it's kind of the same thing. And then when you start going into stance, that's when you start actually adding some more variability to your wheel fitment. And again, we're talking about this more on the show setup, but you're messing with wheel width, tire size. Then you're also messing with a lot of times your camber adjustments, so you can get some camber in your wheels. But if you're trying to say like function and look, probably stance is not the one for you. I would try to aim more towards that flush setup, which is gonna give you probably the best look for most platforms. The last one I would say is something that you may not heard of, and it's a little bit more of like a niche thing that I like to reference, and that's that old school fitment. They call this like old school flush or Mexi flush too. I've heard it before, which is just whatever. But this is like the other bucket that almost everyone is afraid to talk about, because it's usually like really small wheels with a tire that's just stretched to kingdom come. It's still poke fitment, but the fender sits straight down on top of the tire. Like it's almost straight up and down. So there's no camber with it at all. And it's usually aimed at right at the top of the tire. A lot of times it's actually a pretty cool look on some really niche things like old Datsun trucks, old Corollas, Levins, Civics. Honestly, the older the car, the better. It doesn't have to be that crazy, but I think it does look pretty cool. Not really trying to get into the function element of it, but I think when you do not nail this look, it actually does look pretty sick. But what I can say, dialing in your fitment can be a ton of fun. And a lot of times it does take a couple cracks on to get it right. So don't be hard on yourself if you get confused on what offset is or backspacing or things like that. Just let us know in the comments below, because we'd be happy to help. I'm Alex Martini. We hope you enjoyed this video. On the next episode of Don't Mess Up Your Car Build, we will see you on the next one. Adios.